Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our third show of the Sooner Tailgate Show. Happy Friday, everybody. This is July 14th, 2023, and we are still merely weeks away from fall camp starting. But in the meantime, there's tons of recruiting news. There's tons of just discussions to have related to, how this team's going to be, how the college football season is going to go as a whole. And then and certainly other topics. This is the time where a lot of the preseason prognosticators are out in terms of talking about, who's going to make this college football playoffs, who's going to be in bowl contention, who's going to do what. And then certainly there was no shortage of that this week with the Big 12 Media Days going on. So we'll get into that. We'll get into there's a lot of recruiting stuff going on as we've talked earlier last week about the momentum that Oklahoma is getting on the recruiting trail, and it just keeps going further and further. So we'll get into that. Talk about some, we talked a little bit last week about offensive guys that you guys are excited for and interested in. So talk to me a little bit in terms of your comments and questions about people on the defensive side of the ball, and I will talk about that as well. I'm really, I think I'm optimistic on what this defense can be for Oklahoma this year, but I think it's one of those. Obviously, it's kind of a wait and see situation, but really optimistic to what they could be. So this really kind of our lineup for today, and then we'll end up talking about some softball things, and certainly there's a commitment that I believe as we've been on here has just announced for the softball team, and we'll talk about that as it gets a little further on. So make sure you follow me at JasonRay1. I'll continue. Typically, I'll preview what we're going to talk about early on Friday morning here, and then there's a lot of softball, football, basketball, baseball stuff that I'm retweeting and commenting and things of that nature. So please feel free to follow me and make sure that you're also tuning in to Mark and Jason on typically on Oklahoma Sooners Live at 11:30 a.m. Wednesday morning / Wednesday afternoon. Like I said, we'll try. Like I said last week, we'll try to make sure that we deviate a little bit from time to time, just in terms of what they are talking about versus what we'll discuss as well. So, and like I said, as we get closer to the football season, right now we're a couple of weeks away until the fall camp starting. Typically starts the first week in August, so probably closer to 3 weeks away, but we're getting close. The dog days of summer are, believe it or not, I know you probably could tell it if you're local, but the dog days of summer are dwindling, and we're getting in the fall very, very soon. School's getting ready to start in less than about a month, or maybe right at about a month for some places. So really exciting time of the year for for football and back to school, and all of that means football, right? So, but like I said, make sure you follow them and tune in to them on 11:30 a.m. on every Wednesday morning, and obviously make sure you hit that notification bell. So if you know that there's any changes, I believe they had to pivot from Wednesday and go to Thursday this week. So, but yeah, always make sure that you follow them and talk and talk to them and interact with them, and make sure you're watching their show. Absolutely. So let's get into the recruiting a little bit from where we were last week at this time. So last week we talked about the potential decision of Davon, and he actually ended up committing to Oklahoma on Saturday. So he's a 2025 kid that has reclassified to 2024, one of the best tight ends in the country, certainly in the 2025 cycle. And then as he moved over to 2024, he is, and I'm sorry, Davon Mitchell, his name. So as he's moved over to the 2024 cycle, he's still a top 100 overall, one of the top 5-6 tight ends in the country. So just a significant get for Oklahoma. I said right now he's a 4-star. Could see him jumping up into a 5-star status, kind of depending on what that looks like. But so good, in fact, that he may end up being the only one that Oklahoma gets, just in terms of where they they go from a tight end perspective. So will be interesting to watch that. But as Oklahoma has Austin Stogner this year, obviously he'll be gone after this season's over, and Davon Mitchell is a guy that's going to be able to play, I think, pretty immediate. Right, so really, really big get for him. And then yesterday was a little bit of a surprise, and just in terms of how that came about late for Oklahoma in terms of Jaden Jackson, high school teammate of David Stone, who has committed to Oklahoma as well. So he is a kind of from a 247 composite perspective, he's a 4-star, 3-star just from a 247 side. But I think he's a guy that could bump a little bit in terms of what he looks like. So right now, depends on where you're at, if you fall Rivals or On 3 or 247, but composite rankings have Oklahoma at number 26 right now. But I believe as you fast forward from now until the season starts, you've got a lot of you got a lot of big time commitments coming up in terms of decisions. You got Zion Raggins, who is set to make his decision on the 18th of July, 4-star wide receiver that Oklahoma is in a really, really good position on. You got Taylor Tatum, number 1 running back in the country, dual sport guy that will play baseball, down to Oklahoma and USC. Again, Oklahoma has continued to be, I think, the place where most believe that he's going to continue to be, including myself. And then you've got a trio of defensive linemen that will make their decision, I think, by September. I think you've got Williams Nwaneri, who has recently been ranked as the number 1 overall player, not the number 1 defensive lineman, the number 1 overall player in terms of On 3. I think he's number 3 overall in 247. It's not necessarily completely in stone, but there's been some whispers of an August 1 commitment date for him. Then you've got David Stone, again, he's number 5 or 6 overall player in the country. I think he hasn't necessarily made a commitment date, but he's talked about how he wants this to be wrapped up by the end of the before the football season starts. So anticipate sometime within probably the next month to month and a half that he'll be making his decision. Nigel Smith, another defensive lineman, that he will be, I think, around September 1, September 4th is what I've heard, where he may be making his decision. So you've got a lot of other guys that are there for Oklahoma, that this looks like could be a absolutely fantastic class on the defensive line. So you've got those, you've already got Jaden Jackson, and then if you get 3 more potentially with David Stone, and then you look at Williams Nwaneri, and then as we've mentioned, Nigel Smith as well. Those 3 to complement the Jaden Jackson will be just a phenomenal class. Could potentially be the best that defensive line class that Oklahoma's ever gotten. And I think right now, from the things that you hear, Oklahoma leads for all of those. All of those guys. Now there's some other guys that I know that we're interested in and thinking about. Dominic McKinley is another kid. He is very, very pro LSU right now. Would be surprised if he goes elsewhere. Wide receiver Terry Bussey. I think he's probably pretty solid to A&M. I think Oklahoma's still kind of in the door trying to do what they can, but he recently just got fonged to A&M, so I think that's probably where he ends up going, which is understandable. I think right now, now there's some concern on maybe who's going to throw it to him, but I think Oklahoma's really, really still in on that. Danny Okoye, he's going to be a wait and see guy. Wouldn't be surprised at all if his name is not called until November or in that time frame in terms of exactly when he's going to make that decision. So and there's a few other guys as well for for Oklahoma. So if you have any questions specifically, but Oklahoma's in a very, very good spot for a lot of these kids. I missed Caden Durham, another running back that Oklahoma's in a really good spot for. Again, his is in the mid-August timeframe, towards the end of August. I think August 25th, if I remember right. So a lot of exciting things that are going to be happening over the next month in terms of recruiting announcements and stuff like that. Keep an eye on another kid from an offensive lineman perspective. Eugene Brooks has got some crystal balls to Oklahoma, 4-star, just mammoth offensive lineman. Hasn't set a commitment date or anything like that, but I think you could see him pull the trigger pretty soon. Parker Thune talked about possibly 10 to 12 guys between the 24 and the 25 class that could kind of make that decision and commit to Oklahoma within the next month and a half. So that'd be a really good number. And so you see a lot of these kids, want to get this decision over with before the season starts. But I don't know when's the last time that Oklahoma's really been in a favorite for some of these big time defensive linemen that they have this year. So I think if Venables and Bates is able to do that, I think that will be a significant statement to the level of the recruiting and really the trajectory of this program as it sits right now. So let me pause for a couple of your comments, and then we'll talk there. Will be a factor in OU signing David Stone, Taylor Tatum, Nigel Smith, and William Ware. So I may have already talked about that, but yeah, I do think Oklahoma leads for all four of these kids that you've mentioned here, modern day. I think, again, David Stone is the guy. He likes the recruiting game, I think, to a certain degree. So I think sometimes he kind of, I think Oklahoma fans want him to just be done with it, make his decision, make his commitment. I would be, I think at this point I would be floored if he doesn't pick OU. Taylor Tatum, I don't know that I would be floored. I think I would say 80-20 OU. Nigel Smith, probably 75-25 OU. Nwaneri, I'm in the 90s for OU right now. I think that Georgia has kind of laid off a little bit. I think they know that he's going to be a Sooner right now. And so I think, you sign all of these kids, and every one of you've got 3 of the 4 that's mentioned here on the screen are 4 stars with, are 5 stars, talking about David Stone, Taylor Tatum, and Williams Nwaneri, and then Nigel Smith is a high 4 again. So Jimmy talking about Dominic McKinley. Yeah, I mean, I think, here's the thing on him. I think I would not necessarily say, I would say that he is LSU until he's not. Now, I'm not saying that Oklahoma isn't in a really, really good position with him, because they are. But I think, at this point, I think he's LSU's until he's not. Now, that could change. But yeah, you're absolutely. I mean, he's very high on Oklahoma as well. But this is one that I think there's a couple of these kids that are either committed or will be committed very soon that are kind of working on him behind the scenes, without a doubt. So, and we'll see. It's going to be hard to pluck him from there, but we'll see. Alan, NIL will be a factor. Yeah, it's a big factor, and I think it's starting to become a little bit more of a factor for Oklahoma. Now, look, Oklahoma's, I mean, there's some kids out there that are just looking for the biggest bag, right? And I don't think Oklahoma is necessarily in a position, nor are they interested in playing that particular game, just in terms of who he wants to go to the place that's the biggest payday, right? But I do think that they are more of a factor from an NIL perspective than they have ever been, and I think that's going to be proven out by the level of kids that Oklahoma is going to be getting in this cycle. So we talked a little bit about offensive line. Grant Bricks is another one that Oklahoma's in on really, really big time. offensive linemen. Really, I think there's 3 teams that are in that race. I think Oklahoma's in there, Nebraska's in there, and Kansas State's in there. Now, you talk to Oklahoma and Nebraska, they think it's just Oklahoma, and I think it's just Oklahoma and Nebraska. You hear the K-State people. K-State thinks that they're firmly in the race. Now, I think the interesting thing on him and where Oklahoma could end up being the driving force and the winning force in terms of what that looks like is the fact that he is really, really high on Schmidt. Jerry Schmidt is the guy that he's a big time weight room guy, and I think what Schmidt has been able to kind of work with him on is the fact that he's talked through some exercises and things like that Brooks hasn't even used before that he's going to kind of incorporate into his personal routine, and I think there's a really, really good relationship there. Without a doubt. So I think that's almost the biggest area that Oklahoma, in terms of a pitch that Oklahoma is recruiting him on, is the fact that how good of a weight room this is facilities wise, and I think that will only improve. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's continuing to be a factor with Bricks. But yeah, NIL is just such a big part of the recruiting game, such a big part of the of the transfer portal, such a big part of sports and college football specifically. But I think Oklahoma is participating in that at a level really related to Georgia, Alabama, Michigan, the big blue bloods in the country. So, without a doubt. Weston, thanks for the comment. Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly isn't that guy. Now, I think it's, it remains to be seen. I think this is a big year for them. I think they are pretty much a consensus top 10 pick in the country, just in terms of what, that team could be. I know that it was a little bit rocky last year. I mean, I think they had a really good game against Alabama, but I think it's going to be very interesting. They open up with Florida State to start the year in week 1. I think that will be a really big kind of jumping point. But yeah, I mean, I think the point there is that, when you look at Oklahoma versus LSU in that manner, in some instances the SEC has won out, but with these recruits now, obviously 2024 Oklahoma is going to be in the SEC, so that's no longer a factor. I think one of the things that's continued to be a factor over the last few years, and some of these battles that Oklahoma was in, but they just weren't able to make it, to kind of make it over the hump, so to speak, and is because they wanted the opportunity to play in the SEC. Well, now you come to Oklahoma, you will have that opportunity. So I think this will continue to go better and better. Now, if Oklahoma is able to, and we'll get into that as well, but is Oklahoma is able to have a 9, 10, 11 win season, I think that even makes the situation and the platform even bigger, because of what Oklahoma has been able to do recruiting with, the 6-7 record a year ago, and then even the previous year with everything that happened in the staff getting in there late, right? So I think you're absolutely right in terms of that. Alan, OU end up with the best D-line class in the country. Alan, I'll even go a step further with that. If Oklahoma is able to land these, let's just say McKinley goes to LSU, but they're able to land Nwaneri, they're able to land David Stone, they're able to land Nigel Smith. You get those 3 plus Jaden Jackson. It's probably the best. It may consider the best defensive line recruiting class that Oklahoma's ever had in the history of the program, right? And I know that those rankings don't go too far back in terms of what was able to be done, but from everything that I've been told, if those guys get on board, then it could be the best class that Oklahoma's ever had, really, just from a star perspective, right? Because you've had some. I mean, when you go back and look at the defensive linemen that Oklahoma, has got over the last for the last 20, 25 years. I mean, Gerald McCoy is one that comes to mind. Tommy Harris is one that comes to mind as well. But I don't know that Oklahoma's ever got, two top 10 overall players on the defensive line in a class. So I think that will be huge. And I think Oklahoma's in a good spot. And this isn't sunshine pumping. This isn't hopium or anything like that. I think that this is really a situation where Oklahoma has a really, really good chance, and then this is driver's seat for getting a lot of these big time kids. Not only on the defensive line, but as we mentioned, there's a group of kids from different positions. When you look at Grant Bricks on the offensive line, when you look at some of the guys that Oklahoma's trying to get, Danny Okoye, Zion Raggins, like all of these kids, Oklahoma is very, very much in the driver's seat. Heck, they could have an incredible running back class with Caden Durham and Taylor Tatum, outside of Xavier Robinson that's already committed. So yeah, Oklahoma's filling a need at a lot of these different holes that they've had in the past. And 2024 All Americans are not stacked for anyone. Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point. I think it is a very limited field this year. I think one of the guys that Oklahoma was in on, Casey Poe, committed to Alabama a couple days ago. That was expected. I think Oklahoma was kind of out of that race for a while, and it looked like that was really an Alabama position to lose, right? And so you've got the Eugene Brooks kid that I think Oklahoma's in a really good spot in. You got Grant Bricks that I think that one's a little bit of a closer matchup, right? I don't know that I don't know if you could say Oklahoma's in a considerable lead. I would give just a small lean to Oklahoma in that Bricks race, but I think Nebraska is in the race, and I still think Kansas State's in that race as well. His girlfriend is currently at Kansas State, so you know how girlfriends end up in terms of how they win over in a lot of those recruitments, and so yeah, when you look all up and down the roster in terms of positions, I think those are opportunities that they have to not only win those, but just talk about exactly how they can can exactly make their roster that much better than it's been in the past. So what relationship? Absolutely. When you've got some NIL packages that are similar, whatever the team is that has the best relationships are going to win out, and where and there's other intangibles that some of these kids are looking for. Yes, relationships is one of them, but some of them are wins and losses. In terms of if they're looking at similar schools, what team has been successful more over the last couple of years? What team gets their players to the NFL a little bit more? What team tends to get their kids developed a little bit more? And so those are all different intangibles that some of these kids are obviously looking for, without a doubt. But yeah, to say that NIL is not the biggest, one of the biggest parts of the kind of the recruiting side of things, would certainly be misleading. So a couple of other things that we wanted to get to today, in our third Sooner Tailgate show here, is we really wanted to talk a little bit about the Big 12 Media Days that happened this week, and there's quite a few interesting things that came out from those media days. I'll start with Oklahoma State a little bit, just to throw this out there, and Gundy. Again, I mean, there was a lot of questions about Bedlam not continuing, and if they'll play again and things like that. And Mike Gundy for Oklahoma State has been very, maybe controversial is the word when it comes to that topic. He has been very, I think ultimately Oklahoma State and their program seems to be very hurt still continuing to be very hurt by the fact that Oklahoma is going to the SEC, and Oklahoma State didn't get the invitation, or that they didn't go together. So that came out again, and basically Mike Gundy, and I'm paraphrasing here certainly, but he mentioned that that Oklahoma and Oklahoma State and Bedlam will not continue because Oklahoma went to the SEC. Now that's his position, and certainly he has the right to have that position. But I don't think that's completely accurate in terms of. I think that from everything that I've heard, I think Oklahoma has been very, very willing for that matchup and for that series and rivalry to continue. But I think the terms in which Oklahoma State has tried to dictate has been something that Oklahoma has not really been interested in. I think there's been a couple of things related to Oklahoma State wants all these games to be in Stillwater. Again, Oklahoma balked at that. I think there's been some situations where Oklahoma State has asked Oklahoma to buy out some of their non-conference matchups over the next 5-10 years. Again, something Oklahoma really wasn't interested in doing, and so I think those real unreasonable requests, right, or what Oklahoma has been perceived as the bad guy here from the Oklahoma State lens and from Mike Gundy's lens specifically. So I think, if nothing else, it makes for, I think for this year's Bedlam matchup, it makes for a little bit more hostility than there already is. I think it makes for just some interesting storylines as it comes into this matchup late in the year, and so I think that really stole the show from the Oklahoma State side, more than talking about their team and talking about their players, and but so I think that was interesting. That was the one point that I thought. Now when you kind of come to the Oklahoma side, now I had mentioned this to a couple of other people, that one thing that I thought was very interesting in listening to Brent Venables and his tone and the way he talked and the way he spoke and the way in kind of the message that he delivered, you could tell there was a new era of a little bit more confidence than there was last year, right? I think this year and last year you could tell that there was a lot of optimism, but I think it was really just hopeful optimism. I think now you could tell in some of his delivery and some of his comments and things like that, how he went about that there was more confidence on what he has this year, just in terms of competitive balance. I'm sorry, not competitive balance, but competitive depth at all positions, and things like that. So I think I think when you look at that all across the board, I think that's one of the biggest difference makers from this team, particularly on the defensive side, but all across the board, there is more competitive depth than there has been in this roster in quite some time. So when you look up and down every single position, there's more balance. When you look at the quarterback position, there's competitive depth there that wasn't there a year ago. In the same vein, that I think that that Oklahoma really has the opportunity to maybe let DG loose a little bit more in the run game than maybe they did a year ago, because Oklahoma really didn't have anything, and that was very evident in the Texas game. Didn't have anything behind DG, and so I think you'll see that. I hope to see that competitive depth just show itself throughout the balance of the year this year, and where Oklahoma can show. And really talked a lot about where Oklahoma really struggled last year, which was in the fourth quarter, and a lot of these close games that Oklahoma lost, a lot of one-score games that Oklahoma was successful in the year before, but this past year did not win those. And so, I think there's a lot that kind of that plays into that. Venables admitted that it was a tired group. So I think there's a lot that contributed to that fatigue this past year, right? So when you look at a couple of factors in terms of the new strength and conditioning program, when you went from Benny Wiley to Jerry Schmidt again, it was much more physical. It was much more taxing. It was something that a lot of these kids just weren't used to, right? And then I think you also take into account, I should say, a couple of other things that Oklahoma had or didn't have at their disposal. They practiced a lot more with a lot more intensity, a lot more physical, and I think that took a toll on a lot of these kids' bodies that weren't used to it. Kind of midway through the year, and that's when you saw the defense really just kind of tank a little bit more than what it was early on in the season. So, and I think there's, quite honestly, I think there was quite a few kids that just didn't completely buy into the culture, and that does take a couple of years. So I think all that to say, the depth and these kids being used to the kind of the pounding of their body and knowing, what they're being able to do. And certainly would expect that Venables will handle this maybe even a little bit differently than they did last year, and kind of understanding, how much is too much, how much do I push these kids, how much do I lay back a little bit. So I think agree with him wholeheartedly with everybody that Oklahoma's been able to bring in from a recruiting class perspective, as well as the transfer portal gives Oklahoma that depth. Whether you talk about the defensive linebacker group or the secondary group as well. So let's get to a couple of your comments here. Braden Platt, Oklahoma's, it's Platt. I think that's you were talking about, Braden Platt. So yeah, I think he's a guy that Oklahoma is very much in on. I think this is an Oklahoma and Oregon battle. I would say Platt is far from a lock. I think Oklahoma's still in the conversation, still in the. I think he's still in the plans. But I mean, certainly one that Oklahoma would take. But no, absolutely, they would certainly take him, but I don't know that I wouldn't consider him a lock at this point, without a doubt. Does anyone know that he has a defensive guy? I think he's in a position where obviously Oklahoma's within his top 5. I don't know. I think he's another guy that I wouldn't be surprised if A&M A&M is the place for him. I think it's a little bit of a money situation, could be for Cunningham, but yes, absolutely, he's got Oklahoma there. I don't know that there's a decision date on that, Lori, from what I've heard, but yeah, absolutely, I think he's a guy to keep your eye on, without a doubt. Let's see. Sooner Cowboy. Hopefully OU finishes with at least a top 4 or 5 class. I think that's the momentum that they're carrying right now. Sooners. I think they will be right there. I mean, still think about it. This class was top 4 a year ago with a 6-7 record. So if this improves a little bit, then certainly they will. If it improves a little bit, I think Oklahoma still has an opportunity to have a really, really good class, and certainly be in that top 5 without a doubt. Now that's not official, but I think that's where it's headed. Absolutely. So the next part of what I want to discuss is really as we start previewing this team a little bit in terms of some of the. Now, and I think the biggest part of this team this year was really the defensive side of the ball and lack thereof. Whatever statistic you want to look at, 122nd in total defense. I think they were in the 90s in scoring defense, really bad against the run. I think that was what continued to kind of show itself over and over late in the season last year as well. So I think I think you look at that in terms of what I just said and that competitive depth that I think will really help Oklahoma. So I mean, there's a lot of guys that I'm excited about just to see, what they're able to do. I think, the fact that Lua was at the Big 12 Media Day for Oklahoma, I think shows the amount of, I think, respect that BV has for him. He put on a ton of weight in the off season, and I think he has the ability to. I think he's probably going to challenge for one of those inside spots for Oklahoma. So as you go down the list here on the defensive line, I think you've got to love the two transfers that Oklahoma had. When you look at Rondell Bothroyd from Wake Forest, is a guy that probably could have went to the NFL this year, came here looking for a little bit more development, looking for an opportunity to go up a little bit in terms of that cycle for the NFL draft this upcoming season. So I think him is coming to Oklahoma. It was a big time get. I think he's going to make them much better at rushing the passer. Obviously, you look at Trace Ford. He's been a little bit obviously injured. If he's healthy, I think he helps this team tremendously. I think really excited to see at what level PJ Adebari is able to help this team this year. I don't know exactly how much, but this kid is an athletic specimen. When he figures out the football side of it here at Oklahoma, he has an opportunity to be a top 5 draft pick, I think, from everything that I've heard. And he's too good to keep off the field. But at what level is he going to be able to impact this team? And so, and those are a few of the guys on the front line that I'm excited about. I think Dejon Terry is another guy that's gotten some rave reviews here early on coming in. So I think Oklahoma is going to be a team that has that depth among the defensive line. Certainly could go 2 or 3 deep, but I think they have the ability to rush the passer at a greater level than what they have done in the past. So I think that's first and foremost. Really being able to put pressure on the quarterback is really big time. Oklahoma did that fairly well early on in the season, but as through the middle to end, there was very limited pass rush, which caused a lot of people, a lot of scores to kind of go up, which caused the running game to. So there's a couple of things that I'm looking for out of this defensive line. Number one, being able to rush the passer at a higher level. Number two, being able to not get pushed around. Oklahoma got pushed around by almost everyone last year. And so being able to hold their own now, we've got some, and I think that's why you see some of these big time weight improvements for this Oklahoma team this past year. But you've got a lot of depth there as well. Then you move to the linebacker group again. A couple of big time transfers that you get. Connor Neal from Fair State coming in. Venables talked him up big time in the group, and he really spent a lot of time talking about the linebacker group as a whole and where that depth was, and really said last year they only have 3 guys that were going to that could really play last year. Talked about David Agwebu was really more of a defensive end type, but really had to play linebacker because they don't have they didn't have a lot of depth, so they had to play those guys, and they could afford to not look over their shoulder and just be satisfied with how they were playing because of that. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how that you've got a big time kid from Indiana coming over to Son McCullough. Again, I think he's more of the what you would kind of call the run cheetah. Have him more at the line of scrimmage. Big body, big frames. Already put on a lot of weight since he's been here as well. So I think that allows him to be that guy. And then you've got some younger kids. Danny Stutzman again is a little bit of a younger kid, but he's, you heard BV talking about him being more of a leader on this defensive side of the ball. You've got Jaron Kanek as a young kid, and then you've got some of these younger ones. Lewis Carter's another one. You've got Phil Picciotti is another one that has had a really, really good spring for Oklahoma. Kobe McKenzie. So you got a lot of depth there that you didn't necessarily have. Shane Witter is still there, so that's where you have a lot of depth. And then as you move into the secondary, again, Peyton Bowen as a newcomer, I think, again, he's very much in the same conversation where you have PJ Adebawore in terms of he's just going to be too good to keep off the field as a freshman. I don't know that he will necessarily start, but I do think that he, I think he's in a good position to, be part of that rotation for Oklahoma this year. And so you've got Woody Washington obviously as your starting corner. And I think right now, if the season started, I think Gentry Williams would probably be your starter. Opposite him, got some really good playing time late in the year last year to get some, to get some experience, to get some reps in there. I think Reggie Pearson coming over from Texas Tech, I think has the ability to be a really big time, hard hitting, physical safety for Oklahoma. Then you've got Billy Bowman as well, who's really right there with Woody Woody Washington is one of the most experienced guys there in that group. So I think one of the building blocks that BV talked about a little bit earlier on in Big 12 Media Days was really his ability, to kind of size up that defense, and really talking about the interceptions that Oklahoma that's a building block that Oklahoma can go forward with right this year. It was something that leading, I think they led the Big 12 in interceptions. Being able to do that continuously is something that will be big for this staff. So a couple more comments that you guys have, and then we will kind of end everything by talking about some softball stuff here very quickly. I think his ability, I think he's, I don't remember where he was at just from a weight perspective, but, I think this was a big time. This was really kind of a later get for Oklahoma out of the portal, but, absolutely. I think DeJohn Terry coming over from Tennessee will be a big time guy. And I think right now you have to pencil him in as a starter right there on that defensive line for sure. So haven't heard a whole lot about Paya yet. I think you got to love his size and what he brings to the table. So if he can learn and figure out, I think his size, he's an SEC guy from a body perspective, right? He's a big guy that you have in the middle that's hopefully able to take on a couple of blockers and allow some run fits and some pressure there where Oklahoma will be able to impact the passing game at a little bit greater level. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see some questions about Lori. I think he had some questions about some defensive guys that have a date. So we talked about that a little bit earlier. Nothing official on Nwaneri. I think there's rumor, there's some scuttlebutt out there that August 1st will be his commitment date. David Stone doesn't have one, but he wants to get this wrapped up before the season actually starts for him. So he's another one. Nigel Smith, I think, is around early September. So those are some of the dates to keep in mind for some of those guys. Let's see. A couple of talk. I'm not worried about Nwaneri yet. I think I was a little bit a couple of weeks ago, but I think from everything, I think Georgia's conceded. I think Georgia knows that Oklahoma, quite frankly, I think that the package from an NIL perspective is a little bit better for Oklahoma, for Nwaneri than anyone else. So yeah, so let's any questions that you guys have, comments about any other guys or specific on the defensive side, but we'll take this last little bit to talk a little bit about the softball side of things, because I know it's near and dear to my heart. It's near and dear to some people's heart as well. So Oklahoma had another, and I think if any of you guys, I'm sure a lot of you follow Patty on social media, specifically Twitter, and she tweeted out the Go Boomer yesterday. And so I think while we're on this, Carly Keeney has committed to Oklahoma. So she is she's a super senior from the University of Liberty. Actually, I know Liberty is a really good mid-major team on the softball circuit for the last couple of years. I think when you look at her, she pitched against Oklahoma really, really early in the year. So I think Oklahoma was still trying to find themselves offensively, but she shut Oklahoma out for 7 innings. Oklahoma finally got an unearned run in the 8th inning to end up beating Liberty in that game, or maybe it was the bottom of the 7th. But she shut Oklahoma out, beat Tennessee, beat UCLA in the regional play in only allowing 1 run. And so I think seeing what she can do, what she'll be able to be with Jen Rocha, I think is very interesting. So another big get for Oklahoma. So that's 3 ladies that they've got from the transfer portal so far. And we'll see if there's any more. There's not the depth in the portal in terms of big names isn't there at the level that it was last year. But I think Oklahoma could maybe grab one more. I would be surprised if they get another pitcher with with everything that Oklahoma has right now. You've got 5 pitchers on this staff, and I don't think that there would be any anybody else that they would go to from a pitching perspective. But could see them potentially making it go at someone else, maybe like a Taryn Kern, or if there's another bat that they see in the portal that makes them interested. So a couple other comments that you guys have here. If OU lands Nwaneri, that'll be a huge recruiting win. Yep, absolutely agree. And I think Oklahoma, like I said, I'm not blowing sunshine. Everything that I've heard feels like Oklahoma is really, really solid with him. And with these other ones as well. So I don't know that I would say it's a make or break recruiting month, Matt. I think, because you have to understand as well in some of these instances, like even if Oklahoma gets the pledge, like they have to continue to recruit that kid because until he's on campus, until he signs that letter of intent in December, or if it's the late period, whatever that ends up being. Right. So I think you've got to continue. I think I said January. I'm sorry. You've got to continue recruiting those kids. So even if a decision doesn't go Oklahoma's way, I think there's still a lot on the other side that, they still have to hold on to those kids and things like that. So we've seen, what's happened with some of these guys. David Hicks is one that was Oklahoma's up until literally the last hour. So some of these things happen. The defensive guys that already committed as 4-stars, do they have a chance to be a 5-star before they come to college? I don't think so, Lori. I think you could see some movement with Jaden Jackson. Like I said, he's a 3-star, 247 composite 4. He can move up a little bit. I don't think he can move up all the way to get to be a 5-star. So I don't know that any of those, but the guys that we mentioned, a couple of the guys that we mentioned are 5-star guys. So okay, well, thanks everybody for joining again this week. This was really obviously still very new in the infancy stage here on Fridays, but make sure you guys tune in every Friday. We'll try to have that. I'm actually on vacation next week, so this may end up going on Saturday. of next week, but we'll still have something for you. So make sure you hit that like, subscribe button, hit that notification bell so that you know when we go live, so that you can jump on here with us, and always make sure that you join Mark Rogers and Jason Watkins every Wednesday, 11 a.m. Obviously they'll change things as well. But make sure you follow us. Like I said, we'll try to do every Friday, and then join us come football season as well. Once we start, we will get it cranked up with post game stuff every single Saturday as well. Thanks guys for joining. Boomer Sooner, and God bless.